Greetings, Generals. Rodge here. Welcome to Five for Friday, the show all about Five for Victory, the Skirmish miniatures game from Studio Tomahawk, all about World War II. So today is going to be a how to play video that should get you 90% of the way there into playing your first scenario. We're not going to go over advanced stuff. I might leave a thing or two out, but hopefully this will get you up to speed and you'll kind of have the framework you need when looking in the rule book, trying to figure out how to play your first game. And this also will just be a good sort of video about how the game works, so you can decide if it's something you want to get into or not. Looking at the table here, it's not really set up probably for a real game, which is played on a 4x4. This is a 3x4 using my SAGA terrain. I just set things up to really showcase some of the different terrain types, and we'll kind of see the different interactions of the terrain and the weapon types. The forces here are just the basics for each of these factions. So I'm doing American infantry versus German infantry over there. And this is basically the core of each army. Now for the first game, they recommend playing with two stars worth of additional troops, reinforcements, whatever you want to call it. So just to give you an idea of what that would be, it would be additional medium or heavy machine gun team and a mortar perhaps. So if we added one of those to each side, then it would be a full point game. And the first scenario does have objectives going through the middle. Like I said, we're not going to get into that. This is just going to be the core mechanics of everything. So taking a look at the troops. So you do need some way to mark out the leaders of your different teams. So I picked up these like rubber bands for Blood Bowl actually, and they work well for this. So over here we have an American squad, and the team leaders are indicated there. So this is a squad of 2 teams. Over here we have another squad, and there's one team here, one team over there, and then there is the headquarters squad, which is a little squad here, and then the commander who's out on his own. And it's basically the same for the Germans over there. We've got a squad here of 2 teams, a squad here of 2 teams, and the headquarters squad back there with their commander there, and HQ guys back there. So generally you want your teams for a squad to be within L of each other, which is about 12 inches, or I don't know what that is. The game does use centimeters, but it's roughly 12 inches. I'm using the SAGA sticks here today, which are in inches. The game sticks are in centimeters, even for the English version, so they're slightly different. So you can get away with these as long as you and your opponent are on the same page. That's going to be fine. But when activating your squads, having these guys within L of each other is very handy, but not required. You might lose some efficiency if they're further apart, but that's just the way it is. So you might notice the German teams are a little smaller. I think they have one less model than the American squads or teams, but on top of that, I swapped out some rifles to get more submachine guns. So really basic equipment option that almost any faction can take is swapping out, remove a model, and then you can upgrade 4 of your rifles to submachine guns. So I think those guys back there still have rifles, but the whole German force has submachine guns. And once you get close, if you're within L, they're basically twice as good as the rifle, but you can be outranged, but you can close the distance pretty quickly in this game. Now these models aren't 28mm scale. I think the game is meant for 28 millimeter scale. These are 170 to 1/72 scale, borrowing these figures from Top Table Tom. Thanks for that, Tom. We played all our games so far at this scale. Works pretty well. So this scale, or 28 mil, or we've talked about even going smaller, I think is fine too. So let's get into, we're just going to do a couple actions, and then after that we'll circle back around to the overall turn sequence. All right, let's start out with a basic movement. So troops that receive a movement order can do an advance, which is 1 stick, basically, or a run, which is 2 sticks, basically. Now, the terrain will dictate, basically, whether you can use 1 or 2. So, for example, the marsh here, you cannot run in a marsh. That's a rule for that, so you're limited to a single stick. Over here we have a field. A field is one that you can run through, so you can, it does provide some cover and you can run through it. Over here we have these guys. They could advance over this wall here. It's a low wooden barrier, so the characteristics of that mean you can do that. These guys could run up to a certain point. They can't run over the barrier, okay? So they'd have to stop up there. Over here, the woods are, okay, so woods and forest are 2 different types of terrain. So you're gonna have to decide with your opponent at the start of the game which you are using. Woods are basically thinner, don't provide as much cover, and the forests do. So I'm going to count these as forests, and you can't run through a forest. And over here, we're going to count these as a wall, basically a impassable wall, or not really impassable, but it blocks line of sight. It's higher than these troops. At 28 millimeter, we would probably say they could see over this and count it as that. But this is a wall that's high enough to block line of fire to these smaller figures. And so the characteristics of this are slightly different than the wooden barrier here, which is lower. So in this instance, they would have to move up to the wall first and then spend a separate order. Now that they are in base contact, the team leader is, then they could pop over with a separate move action. And that is how kind of a higher piece of terrain works. But let's circle back around. We're going to give these guys a move or an advance. So it's not limited to the S. It's actually, you find your team leader here. You move him in base contact with the stick, and he can go all the way over. So he's going front to back there. So it's actually, this is about 4 inches. With the size of the base, it's about 5 inches actually. So that is how an advance would work. You start with the team leader, and then the rest of these guys just need to be within S of him. So, depending on the equipment types, you could have, individual models. This guy, he could go all the way over to here. He could actually be outside of the terrain as long as he's within S of his boss man. So you could have your troops kind of go out ahead of him. Now, the key thing is all the movement's based off him. So it's not like the next time you move, you're going to be measuring from this guy. It's always going to be the team leader. So just based off where he is, things might not be what they seem. But we got rifles here. We know the Germans have some machine guns somehow, so we're just going to kind of stay back as far as we can, or something like that. When we're giving the shooting order as well, we'll measure from the team leader. So it's really just important to make sure your team leader is in the right spot. If you are doing a run, you put the sticks down like that. You could go like this, or whatever, go around an obstacle, and then you would move the team leader to that spot. So it's not like, it's not this And then this, you know, you can see how you get just a little bit more. If you did it that way, it's actually the 2 sticks. So run isn't quite twice as fast as an advance. And let's have these guys go up, or we'll have them run up to the wall here for whatever reason. Okay, so that is the 2 types of moves you could do. And after a unit activates, you will have to indicate that the unit activated somehow. So if it's their first activation, you will give them a green token of some kind, just to show that. And I'm using little Monopoly houses. And every unit can take 2 actions at some point during the entire turn. And after it takes a second action, it would be upgraded to a red token using the Monopoly hotels here. I'm not sure, but I might just keep using these. Otherwise, I'll swap them out for some beads or something. But this would indicate these guys have acted twice and they can't go again. But that is a movement activation on both of these. All right, now we're going to take a look at some shooting. We're going to activate this unit for a fire order. They are going to shoot at that unit there. I did swap these teams around with the 4-man here. They have the Browning automatic rifle, so I kind of wanted to show how that worked. So when you're going to shoot somebody, you need line of sight, and I'll get into line of sight and spotting a little bit more after this, but we will just go here. These guys can definitely see each other. We measure the range. It's within L, so you measure from your team leader to the closest enemy model. You know, so it doesn't really matter where their leader is. It's whoever the closest is. So we are within L, which is a big deal for the weapon ranges. So the dice you roll depends on the equipment. There are 2 models armed with rifles. Rifles can shoot up to 2L, and they have a D6. The leader is armed with a submachine gun. It can only shoot up to L, so half the range, but its firepower is 2d6, so kind of twice that of the riflemen. And then finally, one of those guys is armed with the Browning automatic rifle, and he gets 2d8. I have some of the smallest d8s in the world here. I don't know why I have such tiny d8s and d12s available, but I picked them up for some reason, so I'm using them for the game here. So this is the kind of starting pool. So for some of the other guns, light machine gun, some of the squads or teams can carry those. That's a 46. That's pretty good. The German version of that, the MG42, is a 2d6 and a 2d8, so it's a little better. Like a heavy or medium machine gun would be just 48 by itself. So like one of these where it's on its own base as a separate unit. So those can be pretty cool, pretty nasty. So that is the starting pool of dice, and any dice roll succeeds on a 5+. So using D8s, and then we can get up to D12s, is obviously a lot better than rolling D6s. So we're in range. We got our pool started. Now we're going to apply some boosts and burns. So a boost would be taking a dice up, improving it. So that's kind of, well, we'll get into that. A burn is reducing the strength of a dice or removing one entirely. So let's just go through the sequence here. So you check on a little chart here, and it's got 5, 6, or 7 different things there that can affect the shots. And by the end of the game, you do have it pretty well memorized. But for boosts, there's not really many boosts at all in the game most of the time. But there is one for shooting, and that is if you are an elite unit. So most troops are just standard dudes, and that's basically everybody has that kind of same profile. You can get basically like a whole platoon of elites if you spend some star points. Or you could go down to recruits, which is kind of a lower class. For elites, if you are elite troops, you get to boost one of your dice. So if you're going to boost, you always boost the lowest die. So you go from a D6 here, and you'd be rolling, three D8s and three D6s. So that's how a boost would work. And it's always the lowest die. So you wouldn't say, I'm going to boost and then swap a D8 for a tiny D8 for a tiny D12. That's not how it works. Okay, so that is a boost. So that's the only boost for shooting typically. If you were recruits, you are obviously a little worse. So you would burn a die. And the burn, so with boost, you start from the bottom, go up. For burns, you start at the top and then go down. So if this was a recruit unit, you would burn a D8 and knock it down to a D6. So you'd lose some efficiency there. So most of the times, probably just going to be using standard troops. So neither of those will apply. If your troops are shaken, so we'll get into morale for a little bit here after the shot. But if you guys have been shot at a few times, taken some stress tokens, then you'll burn 2 dice. So if that was the case, we'd burn both of these down to a D6, but it's not the case here. We're just starting out. If this was reactive fire, so you can actually shoot when your opponent is moving, and I'll just get into that a little later as well, a lot to get through here, but you would burn 2 dice as well. So oftentimes though, if you can shoot them in the open before they can move from one cover piece to another, kind of taking that penalty is worth it. If you are in a vehicle, well, we're not going to get into vehicles today. So that is the kind of status from the firing unit. Now the unit you are shooting at can also affect that. So if your unit you are shooting at is 2 models or less, you'll burn 1. So that would just be the commander over there. He's got his own kind of special rules, so I'm not sure if we could legally shoot him or not over there at this time, but if we could, we would burn one of these dice here. So there are smaller weapon teams out there, and so you'll run into that from time to time, or if units are getting blasted, they will apply as well. The big one here is when you are shooting, the enemy has a chance to hit the dirt. So this is infantry only, and they voluntarily take a stress token. So you need some kind of token for that. So they're yellow, kind of officially, so I'm using yellow dice. And if you're taking full volley fire from fresh units here, it's probably a good idea. We'll see in a second, but the unit has a chance to hit the dirt, and let's have these guys hit the dirt. So they just take a stress token. And what that does, it's going to burn 2 dice. So that is happening. So we're going to lose 2 D8s, go to D6s here. Okay. The other thing which will affect the shot on the unit is the kind of cover the unit is getting. So if the enemy is in a forest, so we're calling these forests, so kind of the heavier version, because they're different than woods, it counts as heavy cover. Okay. Now light cover would be like this wooden fence would be light cover. The marsh is heavy cover. The field is light cover. Would burn 1 dice. So light cover burns 1 dice. Heavy cover burns 2. And this is where the difference between, I'm not sure what the term is, direct fire, I guess, shooting for casualties, or opting for a suppressive fire comes into play. So when I nominated to shoot, I needed to say at the start, if I'm going to do kind of the normal fire or suppressive fire. So the only, well, there's a couple there's a main difference. So the main difference here is when it comes to cover. So if you are doing suppressive fire, you do not suffer the penalty for enemy cover. So if they're in heavy cover, you're going to lose 2 dice if you just try to shoot for casualties versus just going all out with suppressive fire. If they're in light cover, you get to keep an extra 1. So, as far as whether you want to suppress or not, if they're in light cover, probably just eat, lose the die, go for casualties. If they're in heavy cover, then you have a real decision on your hands. Starting out too, it kind of depends on the size of your pool. If I only have 3 dice at this point, if I don't do suppressive fire, I'm just going to have 1 dice left, so when units get depleted, it seems like you might go for suppressive fire more often because it's like, well, I want to do something, with this shot, have a chance of doing something. And suppressive fire, getting hits is important because there's a morale aspect, which is quite huge in this game. So you actually, it's kind of more important, I would say, than the casualties. So having, 5 or 6 man unit that is super stressed up and in the lowest level morale is, less worrying than a 2 or 3 man unit that's fully fresh. They can be a lot more effective. So that's something to consider. So we're just going to be doing regular fire, and I will toss these 2 dice. And then at the end, when we kind of do the final results, we'll see how being suppressive versus kind of the direct fire makes a difference there. All right, so they're in heavy cover. We burned a total of 4 dice getting down to this level. So let's roll it. There's not going to be anything else that applies here. So I'm just going to roll. So every die succeeds on a 5+, and playing new guy Phil, the first time he rolled, he shouted 5 for victory. So every time, it's been hard not to say that every time I roll now. But 5 for victory. Oh yeah, 2 shots. Beep, 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 beep. All right, so we hit twice. Now the opponent gets to make a save. So they'll make a save for each die that hits them. So we took 2 there, and let's talk about the saves. So it's pretty simple. If you're stuck in the open, you're saving on D6s. If you are in light cover, you are saving on D8s. And against kind of, I believe, high explosive rounds, so mortar fire is D8s as well. But these guys are in heavy cover, so you save on D12s. And they're looking for 5s or better, so let's roll that. Fail, fail. Oh boy, not good. Okay. So let's take a look at the results here. So we end up taking 2 hits, or getting 2 casualties through. So what happens is they will lose 2 models. You can pull any guys. So if you got a dude with a really good gun, you'll leave them till last, and you save the team leader for last as well. So you just remove 2 of these guys, and then the enemy unit takes a stress for each casualty they suffered, +1 because they were hit to begin with. Right, just check the rule book real quick, just make sure I was playing that right. That is correct, what I said. So this unit will take 3 additional stress markers, and those stress markers will convert into morale damage, so to speak, which I'll get into in a second. But that is the result of this shot right here. So let's look at some other possibilities. So if they had saved 1 and failed 1, they would have taken, just 1 casualty. They would have taken a stress because they got hit, and they would have taken a stress for that 1 casualty. So they lost 1 guy, and they would have taken 2 more stress. So they would have taken 3 stress. Okay, so if they'd saved both of them, they would have taken no casualties, but they would still take a stress because they got hit. Okay, so they would end up, there'd be 4 guys there with 2 stress. Now, if I just fluffed entirely that die rolled, no 5s, basically nothing would have happened besides that initial stress they took to hit the dirt, because there would have been no hits. Okay, so nothing further would have happened, and that would have been the end of it. Now, how this compares to suppressive fire. So they would have, let's say this would have been all the same, whatever. You would have had 2 more dice to roll with suppressive fire. So let's roll those. 1 more hit. And they would have to make 1 more save. This part's the same. A little bit of a cocked dice. We'll roll that. They saved it. With suppressive fire, you take no casualties, even when you fail the dice. So if this had been a suppressive fire shot, you get more dice to begin with. So this would have been 1 for a hit, 2 for the 2 failed saves. So they would have taken 3 stress, but the 2 models would have been there. Okay. So suppressive fire does not cause casualties, but it does give you additional chances to hit, which can turn into additional chances for stress. And like I said, if you're just rolling, if the difference is rolling a few dice, 1 or 2 versus 3 or 4, you might just take the 3 or 4 just to have an effect and cause stress. And actually, as you play your games, the stress and morale level actually becomes pretty darn important. And taking troops out in a heavy cover like that is quite difficult. So if it was in this situation and those guys were on an objective and they were scoring, I might think to myself, to actually kill every single model in that unit can be pretty tough. 5+ on a D12 is pretty darn good. So I might think to myself, I've got these 3 units this turn. I'm going to suppress. And hopefully they'll rack up 6 or 7 or 8 stress tokens over that. And then they end up falling back, or they're really set to receive an assault. So that can be huge. So that is how shooting works. There's one more important step at the very end. Whenever you shoot, you place a fire token next to your unit, and this makes it easier to spot. So I'm just using a random poker piece there. So this unit has fired, and they'll be easier to shoot at. We'll see the difference between line of sight spotting and shooting in a little bit. The other thing is this unit is activated twice now, so they take a red. They are done for the turn. They may not be activated again unless some special rule comes into play, which they can. But let's talk about the morale side of things before we move on to the spotting. All right, so this is the kind of morale scale from fresh all the way down to panicked. So the highest level of morale to the lowest. So you do need additional tokens, I guess, whatever you want to use. So there is a nice set of markers that you can purchase. I don't know if they're for sale yet, but I have a nice version of all this. But these are just little pieces of paper I cut out. So it goes from green, yellow, red, or orange to red. So these guys over here, they took 4 stress from that single attack. So everybody starts out fresh. So you could theoretically have little pieces of green paper all around, but it's kind of not necessary. So at the first level, they go to here. The second level, when you're going to take the 3rd stress, you actually drop down to the next morale level. So this was their first stress, the second stress, the 3rd stress. The tokens are kind of wiped off. And then the 4th stress takes them to there. So from here on out, Yeah, this should be what is, sitting next to the unit. They're in the shaken morale level with 1 stress. If they take another stress, that's what happens. If they take another stress, a 3rd one, then they'll drop down to the orange level, okay? And if they take another stress, if they take a 3rd one, they drop down to the panicked level, the red one. And hopefully that is kind of making sense to you. So being yellow, orange, or red does have some additional effects on the battlefield. So going from green to yellow, the only change there is when you are attacking, you suffer 2 burns to your attacks. Already your efficiency is dinged a little bit. So if that unit right there, I'm not sure what equipment they would have, but let's say they had submachine gun and 2 submachine guns, and they're both in range. We're shooting if they wanted to do a fire right now. Let's say they're shooting at this unit here, they would take just 2 burns like immediately before they did anything else. And then these guys are behind light cover. They could just hit the dirt, burn these. Now, if you burn down to 1 dice, there's always a chance. So if these guys were to hit the dirt, they would take a stress immediately, and 2 would be burned. But when you go below 1, you roll an extra die, and you take the lower of the 2. So this is an example of, when you get really low on dice, if you're going to burn. So already their attack power is pretty well impaired just by being in the yellow. If you go to the orange level, which is pinned, then you can only do move, or you can't move. Yeah, all you can do is rally at this point. You can't move or engage. You don't even have the option to shoot. You can only try to rally at this point or fall back. And you suffer a burn to morale checks. When you get to here, I should say too, you always count as having hit the dirt if you're at this level. See, if somebody shoots at you, you don't take additional stress, but you always count as having hit the dirt because you're probably on the dirt to start with at this level. All right. When you get to red, it's the same thing. They always count as having hit the dirt and go to ground when they get shot at. At this point, you can't take any more stress, but whenever you would take a stress for any action being shot at or whatever, you take a morale check. And if you fail, you are removed from the table. So if you're shooting at a unit like this, that's another reason you might just use suppressive fire. It doesn't matter if you cause casualties or not, probably, if you can just get them off the table by hitting them at least once, putting at least 1 stress token on them. That's a good thing. Now, you can move back up this scale, and we're going to say that these Germans here are going to perform a rally action. So a rally action does 2 things. First, it removes all the stress from your unit. So the little yellow pips. So there's kind of a, if you're on a 2 versus a none, that aspect, there is kind of a difference there. So it might influence you whether you want to do this or not, because this automatically works. You automatically remove the stress. And then you have a chance to increase your level by 1. So if you're yellow, you could go to green. If you're orange, you could go to yellow. If you're red, you could go to orange. And that starts out as a D8 roll. And if it's a 5 or better, you will succeed. There are some effects for this one as well that can boost it or burn it. If your commander is within medium of you, about 6 inches or so, then you can jack that up to take it up. The commander is not over there, but for the sake of this, we'll say that he is, because I'll just say Another boost is being within heavy cover. So you're at a D12 and you're going to boost. How do you boost that? There's nothing higher than a D12. Well, if you're going to boost higher than a D12, you roll a D6 and you take, if you get a success, you succeed. So you kind of have an extra chance to succeed on that. So that's how boosting above a D12 works typically. But all right, we're going to say the commander is not within range because he's not. They are within heavy cover, so the D8 goes to a D12 at this point. There are some additional modifiers. If there was enemy within medium that could see them, that would be a burn. So if you get close, that's a burn. If you are in the orange or red level, that's a burn. So once you get to orange, it gets harder to get back up. So if you weren't in the open to start with and you were in the orange, your D8 could go to a D6. And now it's like, well, it's probably not going to make that. What am I going to do? But there is an option there. And then if your unit is under half strength, so they started at 4 and they're at half strength or above. So if they were down to 1 guy, they would take a burn for that. So it's pretty easy to get a couple burns, and you're rolling kind of like with the shooting example. You take enough burns, your morale could go from the D8 down to a D6 burn to like a 2D6, take the lowest, so well, they would succeed. Well, they would fail there because you'd have to pass on both of them. So if it gets burned all the way down, where you're rolling an additional die, taking the worst result, it gets pretty hard to rally. You have to succeed on both of those. So that is that. Let's just say the Germans do decide to do that. So we will have them see if they can do it. So they are within heavy cover. So they go from a D8 to a D12. And no of the burns apply, so let's roll it. So 5 or better succeeds. So they've removed the stress just automatically, and the yellow goes to a green, so they're back to full strength. So not too shabby. Let's talk about the other action. So that's a rally action. You can also do a fallback action. Right, so I had to look up the fallback. We haven't done it that much. Typically, you're kind of taking shots, you're rallying, and doing it throughout the game. But if you take so much damage that you're going to be rolling a D6, or the enemy's next to you, so you're rolling 2D6, taking the lowest, it gets pretty tough that you might want to consider a fallback action. So if you do a fallback, you move 2S directly away from the enemy. So if those guys would have performed that, they would have, I'll stretch all the way back out here, would have gone 2S back to there. And when you do that, you automatically remove all your stress like a rally, but you automatically go up 1 level. So if you're in the yellow and the orange, you're in a good position. Typically, you can just rally your way back up. But if you're in a bad position, or you're all the way down to here, or your troops are recruits, so this is a big difference as well. If you are elites, you start at a D12. Okay, so they shoot a little bit better, but the huge difference is morale. So it's easier for elite troops to shunt off all this stress and get back to it, where recruits start at a D6. So if you start at a burn for this level, you're automatically going down to 2D6, take the lowest on this level with recruits. So it gets pretty darn challenging to rally your recruits. So you're going to be doing fallbacks. So if you're down to this level, you might just do a fallback. No dice rolls involved. You fall back and automatically go up to the next level stress-free. So those are your 2 options for that. All right, for line of sight and spotting, there's a few different things going on. There are some kind of hard can't see. So if that's a wall and we say it blocks line of sight, it blocks line of sight. You cannot draw a line of sight through there, so you can't shoot. Going through high, so not necessarily heavy cover, because this provides heavy cover as a marsh, but doesn't block line of sight. But this forest over here, I'm gonna grab my sticks. You know, there's a hard 2S. Nobody can see more than 2S through a high terrain piece like this. So these guys cannot be seen. These units cannot see each other currently. No matter what happens on the battlefield, nobody can see through that. Otherwise, typically if a vehicle's in the way, vehicles block line of sight. But for stuff like this, most units can see 3L on the battlefield, 36 inches. And then different terrain effects will come into play typically due to that. And so you'll go, it's kind of like a sliding scale, not dissimilar to the morale, where you'll start at 3-6, and it's 2 sticks and 1 stick. If you're kind of getting burned down and down, penalties apply, and you can go all the way down to a medium. And there could be good circumstances where you start at 3 sticks, and then once you get past that, you can just basically see the whole battlefield. So, you know, what will affect the spotting terrain or line of sight? So basically, you can just measure this whenever you want. Can these guys see these guys? I'll measure it right now, and they can see each other or not. And depending on the circumstances, it might not be reciprocal. So for every S going into forest, we'll knock this down 2 sticks. So the commander, let's move him up a little bit. So he is within more than 1S, but not 2S. So there'll be a 2-stick penalty. So for these guys to see, you measure that. They start at 3, but they lose 2 sticks because of the heavy forest, and they cannot see him. Now, there's a rule for shooting commanders. You can't shoot the commander unless he's closer than enemy troops. So usually just kind of have him hanging around is typically fine. You know, he's kind of slinking around back there. If we're doing light cover, let's take a look here. So let's just say this is a full S right there, coming from these guys here. So the angles and stuff will matter. So it'll take us down 1 stick. So they go 1, 2. These guys can see each other. So the 2-stick thing doesn't matter. Linear obstacle is a light. That'll knock it down 1 stick. And let's see these 2 units. Can they see each other? So this is more than S here. And if you're in base contact with the obstacle, it doesn't count for you. So these guys can see with 1 stick towards them, so they cannot see. These guys would be down to a medium. So they're going through this much terrain here, and then they have the obstacle as well. So they've kind of been burned 3 times. So it looks like they can't shoot. However, these guys have a fire marker on them. So that means they've shot, basically alerted everybody to their position, and you kind of boost it 2 times. So you go back up to 1 and then back up to 2. So these guys can shoot these guys. The Germans can shoot the Americans right now. Where if the Americans hadn't shot, then this unit would not be able to shoot that unit. And the way you get rid of fire markers is you just do a move at some point on your turn. So if you shoot, all you got to do is move, gets rid of the marker, and it goes away. So These guys are done for the turn, so they're basically just kind of stuck in the water here. A lot of units could draw fire on them at this point. So the spotting thing, it's probably kind of confusing. There's definitely a little chart there. I'm kind of glossing over some stuff. So I think taking a look at that chart might be helpful in explaining it. But if you're just looking at the chart too, it's kind of confusing. So having both the chart and my explanation, hopefully that makes sense. A lot of the times, once you start shooting and fighting, the spotting aspect doesn't really come into play. You know, everybody's within 12 inches. They're blasting at each other. So they've all got fire markers, so it doesn't matter. More comes into play with vehicles, wherein vehicles just automatically take a burn when they're trying to spot. So infantry start with 3 sticks, where vehicles will just be 2 sticks. And usually kind of how that works is the infantry can sneak up on the vehicle quite easily and usually has to shoot before the vehicle can start firing away at them. So there's kind of a stealth element to it. I definitely sped through that. Definitely take a look at the spotting section. There's other things that can apply, but hopefully that'll give you a good start at using it in your test game. The last thing, the last kind of order or action I'll mention is the assault. We're not going to go through one. It's kind of complicated. You'll definitely need to kind of follow that step by step through the rule book. But in order to initiate the assault, you can do an advance or a run. And then if your team leader is within S of an enemy model after that, they can do the engage assault. So you'll pre-measure it ahead of time, so you won't be able to like move and then not do it. So you have to be able to do it. But these guys are in a field, so they can go a full 8 inches if they wanted. They could do a run, and they could run across and assault this unit or that unit because they'll be within short. So if they did do that, they would be in the open for a portion of that. So the enemy might have a reactive fire at that time. So a reactive fire would just be you saying these guys are going to shoot these guys in the open. Or so even if somehow they made it across, so this wouldn't be possible. You can't run into the forest. But if they'd done a move and then another move right away, you could say, I'm going to shoot them before they get into the woods. So you just kind of resolve a normal shot. You take a 2 burn penalty for the impromptuness, but it counts as an action as well. So you can kind of time your moves like that if you do have to go across the open, because if they're use both their actions, you know that you're going to be safe going across. So usually for an assault, there's some point you're running across the field and you're only saving on D6s, so it's not the best place to be, so you want to time it carefully. For the assault, it's kind of like shooting, except both sides will get to roll attack dice. And if you're the attacker and the enemy is shaken or stressed up, it'll be a benefit to you. And then you'll both roll your dice. Whoever causes more casualties wins. And the loser has to retreat 2S. So the big thing with the assault is you'll be able to push an enemy 2S back. And typically you do that if they're sitting on an objective or something. You can push them back with an assault. So definitely you have to go through that in the rule book when you get to your first one. I haven't done it in my games yet. We kind of play 2 or 3 turns, and it takes a while, and we're like gonna call it. But I think in my first game I probably would have. If this unit was holding the objective, scoring points every turn, I'd make the effort to get across and push them off, especially if they're depleted like that. All right, killed some of the lights here so there won't be a glare on the shiny cards here, but we've gone through every action that a unit can take, and we can go through the activation sequence for the turn, now that we kind of understand how units move and shoot and everything like that. So this is the activation, I don't know, deck, hand, what have you. So this is the American one, this is the German one, or Allies Axis. So you can see here, they're identical. Okay, so we don't, there's not special things. Well, the Germans and American, everybody can do special things, but it's not reflected in these cards here. But at the start of the turn or at any point during the turn, basically both players will look at their remaining cards and they're going to say which one they want to play. So let's take a look at a couple cards here. And so both players will play one card, and it's kind of secret. So, you got your full hand here, reveal. I played this one. You played this one. Oh, okay, cool. So the way that these symbols on the cards tell you what you can do. So the number up here is the sequence of play. So if they played a 2, or I played a 2, the Germans played a 1, the 2 goes first. So whatever the higher number is always goes first. If there is a tie, the player with the initiative decides if they are going to go first or second. So at the start of the game, somebody, either it's random or the scenario will dictate who has the initiative. If you have the initiative and decide to go first, we both played a 2, and I'm going to go first, then you give the enemy the initiative card, and then they have the initiative for next time, and they get to decide if they're going to go first or second. If you have the initiative card and you let the other guy go first, then you get to keep the initiative card. If both players end up with the same number 2, you kind of roll on like a little chart. It's a D12, and something kind of random will happen. So there's a little fog of war, battlefield chaos, what have you going on. So, for example, you can walk into a minefield, or a unit that's already finished for the turn all of a sudden can shunt off an action and they can go again. So these can be pretty, depending on the state of the board, can be pretty impactful. But they're random, and they only come up when both players play the same number. So, probably once a turn, maybe that'll happen. But I think the last game I played, it didn't come up a single time. Okay, so what do these symbols mean? So let's start with the blue arrow. That's movement. Okay, so advance or run your troops. The red one is the engage, so the bullseye. So that's either fire or assault. So shoot the enemy or do an assault action. And then this one down here is the special. Tactical, I think is what it's called. And you use that to rally and fall back. And then also if you have an artillery piece, you would use that action to unlimber it. But we'll save that for vehicles. So for infantry, mainly it's move, rally, and shoot are the different actions you take. Okay, so I'm just going to swipe these bad boys out of here. The number of actions you can take is indicated next to it. So you can do 4 moves with this one. You can do 2 moves and a shoot. If you do this one, you can do a move, a shoot, and a rally if you play this one. And so I think that makes sense. So all the way up here. So if you're just going to go all out shooting, it's slow, but if you just want to move something real quick, you can do that. And then sometimes you can just move a whole bunch of stuff. Now, when you play the card, let's say we're going to do this one here. I'll slide these down. Okay. So when you play the card, you choose a unit to activate as one of your options. So there's kind of three different options here. So the first one you can do is just pick pick a unit. So any one of these individual teams on the battlefield, regardless of circumstances. And it could be these guys here. So every unit can take 2 actions. Okay, so with this card, they're not going to be able to resolve all the actions. So you could move them, advance over that wall, and then resolve a shot, or you could advance over that wall and do from that spot, run over there or something like that. Use the 2 move actions. So you could do that. You could shoot, then move. You could just shoot. You could just do 1 action. Technically, you don't even have to do any action. If your kind of troops are depleted, you're just kind of waiting to see what the enemy does. You could just kind of not do anything at all if you don't want to spend an action. These guys could move and then do the assault, do a run, and get all the way across there. So you could do it that way. So you play the card on 1 unit. They get to resolve 1 or both of the actions. If the unit was already like that, it already used 1 of its actions, it could only use 1 of the actions. So the other ones would go to waste. Okay, so be careful about doing that. Most often, on a vehicle or something is when you're playing it directly on the vehicle, is when you would just use it on a unit. The other way to play it is you play it on a squad. So the squads are the 2-man teams, and if their squad leaders, team leaders are within L of each other, then you can split those orders between them. And let's say if they were both fresh, you could have 1 squad shoot, the other one moves twice. You can move both squads, shoot once, any kind of sequence there, whatever you want to do. So you could do that. The last one you could do is play it on your commander. And whenever you use it on him, you can split it up to anybody within L of him. So now we're getting super flexible here. Not quite in range over there, but so these guys are not in the same squad. This is the command team, and that's a different squad, but you could do two moves, fire, just like we discussed over there, split these up however you want between those. And then when you use it on the commander, he gets a free move or shoot action of his own. So he activates whether he wants to or not when you use it on him. And he can kind of join in with a shot that another team is doing, or he can kind of move on his own. That is how that works. So having your commander in a good spot is perfect because you get to use the exact order you want on the exact troop you want. You're not losing any orders. You're not having to do something maybe you don't want to do. So having the commander within range is a big deal. So the sequence then is you and your opponent will play a card. Let's see, you did that one. It's resolved. Now, this is your hand. These are kept secret. You think to yourself, oh, okay, which one do I want to do now? And you do that one. Your opponent will play another one. You guys put them face down, flip them over, same time. Oh, all right, the German's going first. He's going to do up to 4 moves, split between units or squads or commander. And then the American player will go. That one's down. And you just go one at a time. Boom. Boom, reveal. Okay, the German's going first. He can rally and shoot. These guys can go up to 4. And you go basically all the way through the deck. And then when you get to the end of the deck, you played 1 turn. And then there's, probably three or 4 more turns to go. So that's the sequence there. I should mention, you can do retrieve a card during your turn. So if you had used this card, for example, on one of the first ones you did, and it's later in your turn, and maybe these are the 3 cards that you have, and you're like, gosh, dang it, I really I just want to shoot. When you play your card on your turn, flip it over, and then instead of activating units, you say, I'm going to retrieve a card. So you discard a card from your hand, pick up the one you already played, and that's that. So you don't do any actions at all, but you have that card available then to use on your next turn. Okay, so that can come in handy as well. All right, once you played all your cards, the turn has ended. So you remove the order spent. So at the end of it, you should have a bunch of Monopoly hotels next to all your troops. Everybody will remove those, and then you pick up your card. Yeah, the enemy guy does it as well. You pick up your cards, and you'll go it again. You'll go through another turn. So a couple things, especially towards later turns, all your troops will be activated, but you still have a couple of cards you have to play. So you still go through the normal sequence there. Your opponent might still be able to go. You still play it out, because if you guys choose the same number, a random event could occur. So you go through the sequence with the cards, even though all your troops have been activated. So that is something that will probably crop up. Another thing to do at the end of the turn is to check casualties. So if one side has lost 50% of its models, they lose and the game is over. And so it's an automatic loss. So what happened to a game with Top Table Tom there, he was on the objectives. He was scoring loads of points, but the enemy was blasting him away, and he ended up losing because he had to retreat and all. He lost the game. So even if you're ahead on objective points, you definitely got to be watching your casualty count. The last thing I'll get to is each side gets a special card, and this is played out of sequence from spending those other cards. So basically this corresponds to the national rule of your nation that you're using. So with the Americans, got tons of ammo, no worries about supply. So once per turn, you can roll a D12, and then a 5 or better. A unit that is exhausted like this can do a free suppression fire. So just start blasting away. Pretty cool. No worries there. The German special rule is they can, after they play a card, they have to just flop this down, and they say, I'm going to change this to another movement, or I'm going to change this to an engage. And they roll a D12 on a 5 or better. It's a success, and they can do that. So these cards, these are just like reminders. They tell you when you've spent it. You can do that once per turn. So it's just an out of sequence type of thing that you can do. So these are just reminders. You don't do these instead of those cards. These are just in addition to, as a reminder that you've spent it or you haven't. There are some bonus cards as well. I haven't printed those off, but you get those during scenarios, and they're extra ammo cards. They get you extra attack dice or limit attack dice. They do various different things. They're kind of played like interrupts during the game. Kind of like these kind of cards as well. So they don't replace these. They're just kind of in addition to the normal sequence cards. All right, so I think that's going to do it for this video. So things I haven't touched on, we just kind of glossed over some of the terrain stuff. So there's another 5 or 6 different terrain types and aspects to it that I didn't really get into. Didn't really talk about vehicles by design. Shooting at tanks or shooting anti-tank weapons follows a different sequence. Small arms into vehicles follows a different sequence, and the spotting and stuff is slightly different. There's transports So I won't get into all of that with this video. I might do an advanced video about that in the future, perhaps. Assault I didn't get into. Doesn't come up too much, but I think it's going to be key to a lot of games once we get going, playing full-size games. Just follow that sequence. Again, maybe I'll do a video about that in the future. And then army construction, I didn't really touch on that stuff. You know, what I've been using is the base squad up there. So every nation has a special rule. Every type of platoon has its own rule. It's indicated on the sheet. You can swap out rifles for submachine guns, sometimes Panzerfaust for the Germans. You can use some stars to upgrade troops or purchase additional teams and weapons and stuff like that. So it depends on the scenario. So the intro game is a 2-star scenario, so you can buy 2 stars worth of reinforcements. And other scenarios I've seen have been 6 and 10, and I want to say even 13 or something in the teens as well. So there's some bigger battles out there where you could be between the vehicles and reinforcements. You might be using double this on a 4x4 for a really big battle. So I've seen that out there, but I'm still just learning things. So I've definitely left things out, but hopefully I'm sure there's a mistake in here somewhere. So if anybody points out any mistakes or anything like that, I'm going to post them below in the pinned. I'm going to have that as the pinned comment. So if there's multiple mistakes, I'll just have them all up there. So if you take a look at the video, just go down in the comments and it'll, you know, if I made a mistake somewhere, that will be indicated there. But hopefully this will be a good resource and help new players get started, or if you've been on the fence about it, it'll kind of make you interested or not one way or another. But that'll be it for now. I'm going to be continuing to play this pretty casually. I think no plans for a regular weekly show or anything, but overall it's pretty fun pushing these guys around. So I might end up picking up some models and keeping at it. So all right, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.
SAGA!
If you'd like to see more Saga content, consider joining the Heathen Army over on Patreon or popping on down to the Saga Thursday Discord server. Links below. Thanks, guys.